The war-torn world of Arcus IX lay shrouded in a crimson haze, its horizon split between jagged mountains and the blackened skeletons of cities that had once been proud bastions of humanity. The air itself seemed tainted, thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid bite of burning promethium. Space Marines of the Crimson Fangs had been deployed weeks prior to root out the insidious corruption that gnawed at the planet's veins, yet none of them had foreseen the depth of the darkness waiting below the surface. "Brother," Sergeant Kaelus tightened his gauntleted fists, his power armor scarring under the relentless bombardment of orbital fire. He could feel it even now, a gnawing itch beneath his skin, a whisper beneath the roar of bolter fire. It was as though the planet itself bled into him, seeping into his mind through every wound, every splintered stone, every fallen comrade. The first kills had been simple. The heretics of the local cult had been armed poorly, their devotion only masking the stench of death already rising around them. But even in their panic, they had screamed words that clawed at Kaelus's soul, words that spoke not of prayer but of rage. "Blood, blood for the blood god." The phrase had burned itself into his mind. At first, Kaelus had shaken it off, a passing echo of superstition, a trick of fatigue. Yet as the campaign dragged on, the whispers returned, subtle at first, like the hiss of air escaping a dying lung, then growing louder, more insistent. He began to notice them between the cracks of battle, the trembling of his brothers as they paused over corpses, the unsteady hand that drew a bolter from a slain foe, the sudden, unprovoked rage that flared in the eyes of even the most disciplined veterans. It began with small indulgences. Kaelus found himself taking pleasure in the killing of a particularly stubborn heretic, feeling not just duty but delight. The scent of blood became intoxicating, filling his senses until the cries of the dying were no longer cries of warning, but a symphony, and he, the conductor. He had always known war to be a necessary evil, yet this was different. It was pure, visceral, and it called to him with a ferocity that shook him awake in the dead of night. His dreams had changed, too. He saw a throne of jagged bone, rivers of blood running around its base, and at its center, a figure whose eyes burned like molten iron. The figure spoke no words, yet Kaelus understood him perfectly. Each image, each whispered command, etched itself into his memory, gnawing away at the vestiges of duty and honor that had once defined him. In the dream, his hands were not clad in armor, but were bare, drenched in crimson, and he could feel the lives of countless men and women flowing through his fingers. When the first of his brothers fell, Kaelus did not mourn. The warrior had been loyal to the last, his scream swallowed by the roar of artillery and fire. Yet something inside Kaelus stirred with a perverse satisfaction. He realized then that he did not fear death, not for himself, not for those around him, but that he craved the slaughter, the chaos that came with it. Each battle, each kill, became a ritual, a communion with the unseen god, whose presence clawed at the edges of his consciousness. The turning point came during the assault on the shrine at Dargan Pass. The cult had prepared a trap, rigging the hallways with explosives and filling the chamber with a throng of devotees armed with crude weapons. The first wave met Kaelus and his squad with screams of madness and devotion, their bodies moving with unnatural speed and strength. Bolters thundered, chainswords roared, and still the cultists pressed forward. By the time Kaelus reached the inner sanctum, the walls were slick with blood, the floor a mosaic of torn flesh and shattered bone. It was there that Kaelus first touched the bloodstone altar, a jagged monolith carved with runes of ancient menace. The stone pulsed beneath his gauntlet as if it were alive, and the whispers in his mind swelled into a chorus. He felt a heat unlike any fire, a hunger that had no origin but seemed to consume him from within. With a single, trembling hand, he pressed his fingers against the stone. It was warm, almost welcoming, and the taste of it, though he had not yet bled upon it, lingered in his mouth. In that moment, Kaelus understood he had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back. The voice that spoke inside him now was not merely the echo of the battlefield, but the essence of Khorne himself. "Blood honor, rage give yourself," it whispered, and Kaelus for the first time did not resist. The following weeks saw Kaelus' transformation accelerate. His squad noticed the change first in his eyes, once steely and controlled, now burning with a crimson light, pupils narrowing into slits like a predator. He no longer hesitated to kill, even when the threat was minimal, and he seemed to feed off the carnage in ways that unsettled even the most battle-hardened veterans. Rumors spread quietly among the ranks that Kaelus had cut down a fleeing heretic with a blade that gleamed like molten metal, that he had entered a rage so uncontrollable he had torn through a squad of enemies with his bare hands, leaving nothing but bodies in his wake. The chapter closes here, as Kaelus stands atop the smoldering ruins of the shrine, his armor streaked with blood, and gazes out at the battlefield. The whispers of Khorne have become his constant companion, a roaring tide that will never recede. The blood god has marked him, and he is no longer merely a space marine of the Crimson Fangs. He is a vessel, a weapon, a herald of unending war and carnage. The world of Varkis IX was dying. Its skies bled crimson, streaked with the smoke of burning cities and the eruptions of endless artillery fire. Jagged mountain ranges split the horizon, their peaks twisted like broken teeth against the sky. Rivers once clear now ran thick with rust and blood, reflecting the horrors that had been wrought upon the planet. Humanity had fought to maintain a semblance of order here, but the corruption that thrummed beneath the surface had festered for centuries, and now it had awakened with a ferocity that even the Adeptus Astartes could scarcely comprehend. Brother, Sergeant Kaelus of the Crimson Fangs crouched behind the shattered remains of a cathedral wall, his armor pitted and scorched from recent bombardments. His helmet was cracked across the right eye, exposing a gaze that was already hardened by war, yet now flickering with something far darker. Around him, his brothers moved with calculated precision, bolters booming, chainswords whirring, each cut and shot precise, practiced. And yet, even amidst this orchestrated chaos, Kaelus felt a stirring, a vibration deep within his bones that did not belong to the battlefield itself. It started subtly. First, a whisper that slithered in the edges of his mind as he executed a kill with cold efficiency. A voice, low and indistinct, that called his name, promising power, pleasure, and liberation in the most primal sense. Kaelus had shrugged it off as fatigue, the aftereffects of extended combat and lack of rest, but the whispers persisted, growing stronger with every drop of blood spilled, every enemy slain. By the third day of relentless assault, he no longer needed to fight to hear it. The voice was always there, coiling around his thoughts like a serpent, insinuating itself into every decision, every glance, every heartbeat. The first kill that truly changed him had been simple. A cultist, armed with nothing but a rusted blade, charged him in blind zeal. Kaelus' chainsword met the man's chest, cleaving armor, flesh, and bone in a single stroke. The cultist's scream was loud, piercing, but beneath it, Kaelus heard another sound: satisfaction, raw and intoxicating, emanating from the marrow of his bones. He knelt there amidst the ruin of the cathedral, breathing heavily, and for the first time in decades, he did not feel duty, he did not feel honor. He felt hunger, and it was a hunger that would never be sated. By the fifth day, Kaelus had begun to seek it, almost subconsciously. He lingered longer over the corpses of enemies, tasting the tang of their blood in the air, letting his mind dwell on their screams. He noticed how the smell of blood excited him, how the sight of torn flesh thrilled him in ways he could not name. His brothers noticed too, their glances quick and uneasy when he strode past, bolter smoking, eyes glinting with a red light that was not reflection, but fire from within. The turning point came at the shrine of Dargan Pass. The cult had anticipated the Crimson Fang's approach, filling the ancient hall with traps and fanatics eager to die in service to their bloodthirsty deity. Kaelus' squad pushed forward, tearing through ambush after ambush, bolters roaring, chainswords carving swaths through bodies. He felt the whispers grow louder, their cadence aligning with the rhythm of his heart. Blood give, rage, they hissed, and he obeyed. It was in the inner sanctum that Kaelus truly crossed the threshold. The room was drenched in crimson, walls slick with the viscera of the faithful, candles made of fat and bone dripping over carvings of grotesque runes. At its center stood the altar, a monolith of jagged bloodstone, carved with glyphs that seemed to writhe beneath his gaze. Kaelus approached it, chainsword still dripping with gore, and placed his gauntlet upon the altar. Heat surged through him, unlike any fire he had known. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and commanding, vibrating within his skull: honor through blood, power through rage. Serve me. Kaelus closed his eyes, his mind once disciplined and resolute, shattered in that instant. He felt the blood of countless slain enemies flow through him, the thrill of violence heightened beyond mortal comprehension, and he wanted more. He emerged from the shrine changed. The first act of his corruption manifested immediately. He tore through a fleeing squad of cultists with his bare hands, feeling the bones of one snap beneath his fingers as he laughed, a sound guttural and alien. His brothers stopped, horror in their eyes, but Kaelus did not care. He was beyond fear, beyond shame, beyond mercy. The whispers of Khorne had become a constant drumbeat in his mind, synchronizing with his own heartbeat, demanding devotion in the only language he could now understand: slaughter. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation deepened. Kaelus began to see the battlefield differently. He saw not enemies and allies, but rivers of blood and potential. Every skirmish became a ritual, each kill a prayer to a god who required no words, only carnage. His eyes, once steely and calculating, now glowed faintly crimson beneath the visored helm, pupils narrowing like predatory slits. The brothers who had once stood beside him now avoided his gaze, whispers spreading that Kaelus had become something more than human, something monstrous and unstoppable. The psychological torment was as sharp as the physical transformation. In dreams, Kaelus wandered a landscape of bone and blood, rivers running thick with the echo of worlds, skies raining crimson. At the center of it all, a throne of jagged skulls rose, and upon it sat a figure cloaked in shadows and fire. It spoke no words, yet Kaelus understood perfectly it was Khorne, the blood god, and he was both judge and patron. Kaelus' hands, bare and slick with blood, reached toward the throne, and he could feel the god's approval, a silent promise of power for those who embraced the rage fully. Yet with the exhilaration came horror. Kaelus began to realize the price of his devotion. He no longer felt compassion, no longer felt remorse. The memories of his past, of camaraderie, of loyalty, of duty, were fading, replaced with images of skulls, rivers of blood, and the cries of the slain. He understood, in a moment of stark clarity, that the man he had been was dead. All that remained was a vessel, a herald, a weapon of unending violence. The final test of Chapter 1 came as Kaelus' squad encountered a human city attempting to flee the planetary conflict. Civilians huddled in ruins, terrified, offering prayers, pleading for mercy. Kaelus' brothers hesitated, but he did not. With a roar that shook the walls around them, he charged, bolter spitting fire, chainsword cleaving bone. Each kill sent a thrill through him, each scream feeding the hunger that now defined him. The Crimson Fangs who had once been his brothers could only watch, stunned and fearful, as Kaelus descended fully into Khorne's embrace. At the end of the day, Kaelus stood alone atop a mound of corpses, his armor streaked with gore, visor reflecting the chaos below. The whispers of Khorne were now a constant, roaring tide, and he welcomed them. He had become something more than human, something terrible and magnificent. He was no longer brother, Sergeant Kaelus of the Crimson Fangs. He was a servant of Khorne, a harbinger of blood, and the first stain of his corruption had been irrevocably etched into the galaxy. And as the sun set over the scarred world, crimson clouds reflecting the blood-soaked lands, Kaelus lifted his chainsword to the sky and roared a name that no one else dared speak: Khorne, I am yours. The world of Arrakis X no longer belonged to humanity. Its cities had been reduced to shattered fortresses of stone and steel, its fields soaked with blood and fire. Smoke twisted into the sky like black serpents, carrying the stench of death across the desolate plains. The survivors, soldiers and civilians alike, had come to understand one terrifying truth: the crimson shadow of the blood god now walked among them. Kaelus strode across the battlefield like a living storm, his armor streaked with gore and ichor, the aura of Khorne flowing from him in palpable waves. Where he passed, the weak fell and the strong trembled. His chainsword sang a song of death, a relentless hymn that cleaved through armor and bone alike. Even his brothers, the remaining Crimson Fangs, regarded him with awe and fear. No longer was he the disciplined sergeant who led them into battle. He was something more, something monstrous, a manifestation of wrath incarnate. The first target of his renewed fury was the city of Draven's Hold, a human bastion that had resisted the cultists' encroachment for decades. The city's walls were high and thick, but they were not enough to deter Kaelus. He tore through the enemy's outer defenses with a ferocity that no living man could match, his chainsword a blur of steel, his bolter vomiting fire into the throngs of defenders. Every shot, every swing, every roar of rage fed the whispers that now resided permanently in his skull. Blood, more blood, I am yours, Khorne. His squad had long since stopped calling him by his name. They whispered instead the Red Terror, the Blooded, the Harbinger. They could not follow him fully. could not match the madness that now fueled his every action. They moved in disciplined support. Bolters trained on the cultists and rebels, but their eyes betrayed their fear. Kaelus moved as if guided by an invisible hand, the battlefield a chessboard and every living thing a pawn to be broken beneath his fury. Within the walls of Draven's hold, Kaelus encountered a unit of Imperial guardsmen who had survived the initial onslaught. They formed a desperate line, bolters and lasguns raised, aiming to protect the terrified civilians behind them. Kaelus laughed, a sound guttural, alien and soaked with rage. He did not speak. There was no need. Words were redundant in the presence of such inevitability. He charged, chainsword swinging, cleaving through guards and stone alike. Bolts of lasfire met his armor and ricocheted harmlessly, as if deflected by some divine favor. By the time the dust settled, the streets of Draven's hold ran red. Civilians were gone, either slaughtered in the chaos or fled into the hills, but their cries remained, echoing in Kaelus' mind, intensifying the bond between him and the blood god. Khorne's whispers were now a roar, a symphony of war that guided his every action. In the aftermath, Kaelus knelt atop a pile of corpses, tasting the metallic tang in the air, feeling it pulse through his veins. Every life taken was a prayer answered, every scream a blessing. But it was not enough. The more Kaelus killed, the more the whispers demanded. More and more rivers of blood, rivers of death. He realized that this was no longer a battle for survival or victory. This was a ritual, a rite of passage that would elevate him from a mere servant of Khorne to a vessel of unparalleled carnage. He could feel the gods gaze upon him, a pressure that bent the battlefield itself, urging him to greater feats of destruction. The weeks that followed saw Kaelus' power grow. He hunted cultists across the fractured world, engaging in battles that resembled carnivals of slaughter. Entire regiments of enemy forces were torn apart in moments, their bodies shredded, scorched, and strewn across the landscape. Kaelus' brothers struggled to contain him, their disciplined tactics ineffective against a mind consumed by rage and divine purpose. Yet Kaelus did not merely fight, he consumed. The blood, the fear, the chaos, all of it flowed into him, feeding the transformation that now made him less man and more instrument of wrath. During a particular campaign in the ruins of Narvik Spire, Kaelus faced a warband of Chaos Space Marines devoted to another god, their armor blackened with the mark of Nurgle. The clash was cataclysmic. Kaelus moved like a whirlwind, chainsword tearing through armor, bolter shells exploding in tandem with psychic detonations. The air was thick with decay, rot and fire, yet Kaelus breathed it in with satisfaction. Each enemy struck was a tribute to Khorne, each kill a step closer to transcending mortality. It was here that Kaelus' corruption reached a new pinnacle. His mind fractured under the combined influence of the battlefield and Khorne's whispers. He began to see the world not as it was, but as a canvas of blood and bone. Entire cities, armies, and planets became tools, opportunities, and sacrifices. Every heartbeat in the universe, every scream of terror, every drop of blood, he could sense them, feel them, and manipulate them. The whispers became a chorus, and he, the conductor. Yet even in this euphoria of destruction, a shadow of his former self lingered. Fleeting moments of memory struck him, faces of brothers, orders given, vows made. They were quickly drowned out by the torrent of rage. Kaelus realized he no longer wished to remember. Humanity was a weakness, a tether that would hold him back from the gods' favor. He embraced the void within himself, a black maw that consumed pity, mercy, and loyalty. Only the rage remained, pure and unending. As Chapter 2 draws toward its close, Kaelus stands atop the cratered battlefield of Narvik Spire, surrounded by the smoking remains of war. Fires reflect off his crimson-streaked armor, the sky overhead a tapestry of smoke and ash. The whispers of Khorne swirl around him like a storm, urging him forward. He lifts his chainsword high, blood dripping from its edge, and lets out a roar that echoes across the plains, a declaration of devotion and power. I am Kaelus, I am yours, Khorne, and I will drown this world in blood. The transformation is nearly complete. The whispers are no longer suggestions, they are commands. Kaelus is no longer merely a space marine. He is a living avatar of rage, a herald of the blood god, and the universe itself trembles before the rivers of blood he will unleash. The corruption is irreversible. The next step is not survival, not conquest. It is annihilation, and Kaelus welcomes it with open arms. The skies above Varkis IX had become a permanent crimson storm, streaked with fire and ash, the air thick with the iron tang of blood. Cities lay in ruin, their stone walls shattered, their streets rivers of gore. The wails of the dying carried across the plains in an endless lament. The once proud world had become a testament to slaughter, a sacrificial altar to Khorne, and at its center strode Kaelus, no longer a sergeant of the Crimson Fangs, but the living avatar of rage incarnate. His armor had changed, molded by the very forces that now consumed him. Jagged edges erupted from the pauldrons, spikes curling outward like the fangs of a predator. Crimson sigils of ancient menace carved into the plates. His chainsword had grown in size, almost impossibly heavy, yet he wielded it with the ease of a man possessed, each swing sending arcs of death through all who dared oppose him. The whispers of Khorne had become a roar, constant and commanding, guiding his every thought, his every breath, his every heartbeat. Where Kaelus walked, death followed. Entire regiments of Imperial Guard, bolstered by the occasional loyalist Space Marine, attempted to stem his tide of destruction. Yet their efforts were futile. Bolt of fire shredded armor, but Kaelus shrugged it off as though it were paper. Lasgun beams seared his plate, yet left no mark, deflected by some dark blessing. And when he swung his chainsword, it was no longer merely a weapon. It was the very embodiment of Khorne's wrath, carving arcs of blood and bone across the battlefield. The first signs of his army appeared soon after. Survivors of the cultist uprisings and renegade warbands, drawn by the scent of blood and the overwhelming aura of power, fell into formation around him. They revered him, not merely as a leader, but as a god walking among mortals. Kaelus did not speak words of command, his presence alone was enough. The whispers guided them as they moved, striking fear into their enemies, before even the first swing of his chainsword. His army was a living extension of his fury, each soldier a node in a web of slaughter, each scream and death fueling the next. In the ruins of Dargan Pass, Kaelus performed the first of many blood rites. At the center of the shattered cathedral that had once been a bastion of the faithful, he arranged the corpses of defeated enemies into patterns of jagged, ritualistic design. Blood ran in rivulets across the floor, pooling into channels carved with precision, each representing a prayer to Khorne. Kaelus knelt atop the altar of bloodstone, letting the ichor of fallen foes run over his gauntlet, feeling the god's power pulse through him. Every heartbeat, every breath, every drop of blood consumed was a sacrament. He had become more than warrior, he was a vessel, a living conduit of carnage. During this campaign, Kaelus encountered his first true challenger detachment of Space Marines from the Blood Angels chapter, dispatched to halt the rising tide of corruption. They were elite, disciplined, and fanatically loyal to the Emperor, yet Kaelus approached them with a singular clarity of purpose. The battle was apocalyptic. Chainsword met chainsword, bolt of fire erupted in symphony, and the screams of the fallen echoed across the ruined cityscape. Kaelus moved with preternatural speed, dodging attacks, striking with lethal precision, his body a whirlwind of muscle steel and unbridled fury. It was here that his corruption manifested fully. As the Blood Angels fell one by one, Kaelus felt a surge unlike any before. The whispers had become a torrent, guiding his hands and senses with uncanny precision. He could feel the life force of every enemy, the tension in their muscles, the rhythm of their heartbeats. Every strike, every death, every scream sent him deeper into communion with Khorne. By the time the battle was over, the streets were a tapestry of carnage, and Kaelus stood among the dead, chest heaving, chainsword dripping, his eyes glowing crimson beneath the helm. He was no longer Kaelus of the Crimson Fangs, he was Kaelus the Blood Champion. The next phase of his corruption was psychological as well as physical. He began to hear not only the whispers of Khorne, but the inner fears and desperation of those around him. Friends, allies, enemies, all became instruments in his symphony of violence. He manipulated his army with uncanny insight, anticipating their moves, exploiting their weaknesses, bending them to his will. Even his remaining Crimson Fangs, loyal to the last, were unable to restrain the monster he had become. Fear and reverence intermingled in their eyes as they followed him into slaughter after slaughter. In the hills of Narvik Spire, Kaelus faced his most harrowing challenge, yet a coalition of Imperial Guard and Loyalist Space Marines, reinforced by mechanized units and artillery emplacements. They had come prepared, aware of the threat he posed, yet they underestimated the extent of his transformation. Kaelus charged at the forefront, chainsword held aloft, a beacon of unstoppable rage. The battlefield erupted in chaos. Tanks were cleaved in half, infantry shredded before they could fire a single round, and bolt of fire ricocheted harmlessly off his armor. The whispers of Khorne guided his every motion, and he reveled in the destruction. Amid the chaos, Kaelus performed a ritual of blood, a grotesque spectacle that would be whispered about for generations. He drew a circle in the center of the battlefield, using the blood of fallen foes as ink and the bones of enemies as stakes. Within the circle, he executed a sequence of ritualistic strikes, each one consecrating the lives lost as offerings to the blood god. Flames erupted from the ground, fueled by the power of the ritual, and the sky itself seemed to bleed in response. The battlefield had become a holy altar, and Kaelus, its high priest, consecrated in blood and fire. As the ritual concluded, a wave of terror swept across both friend and foe. His army felt the surge of power emanating from him, their frenzy heightened, their rage magnified. The coalition forces were shattered, fleeing or falling in ruin. Kaelus stood atop the corpses of both allies and enemies, surveying the destruction, feeling the pulse of Khorne's approval. Every scream, every death, every drop of blood had been acknowledged. He was no longer merely a champion, he was a messenger of annihilation, a god made mortal. Yet even in this exaltation, the whispers reminded him of the next step. Khorne's hunger was insatiable. The blood god did not desire victory, he did not desire conquest, he desired endless slaughter, a river of blood that would stretch across worlds. Kaelus understood this fully now. His purpose was not merely to kill, but to consume, to become a perpetual storm of rage, a living embodiment of divine wrath. His thoughts, once his own, were now inextricably bound to the god's will. He felt neither fear nor hesitation, only anticipation, and a ceaseless, burning desire to drown the universe in blood. The chapter closes with Kaelus on the precipice of even greater devastation. The armies of Varkis Ix had been shattered, their cities reduced to ash, yet he knew this was only the beginning. Khorne's whispers spoke of worlds beyond, of blood debts unfulfilled, of endless opportunities for slaughter. Kaelus, fully transformed, lifted his chainsword to the sky, the crimson glow reflecting in his eyes. His body trembled with the thrill of impending war, the fury of countless battles, and the intoxicating call of his god. "I am your servant, your weapon, your herald," he roared, voice carrying across the blood-soaked plains, "and I will bring your fury to the stars." At that moment, Kaelus was no longer a man, no longer a space marine, no longer even a soldier. He was the living embodiment of rage, a vessel for Khorne's will, and the galaxy itself would tremble before the rivers of blood he would unleash. His corruption was complete, his devotion absolute, and his path endless, unrelenting, and drenched in blood had only just begun. Varkis Ix was no longer recognizable as a world. Cities lay in ruins, their walls shattered. Streets rivers of coagulated gore. The sky had turned a perpetual crimson, veiled with smoke, ash, and the acrid scent of fire. Fires burned endlessly, igniting dry fields and forests alike, and the cries of the dying became a constant background hum, a lullaby of slaughter for those who dared to survive. Kaelus moved across this wasteland like a living storm, a harbinger of annihilation whose very presence instilled terror in the hearts of friend and foe alike. No longer merely a space marine, Kaelus had transcended his former humanity. The corruption of Khorne had reshaped his body and mind. Muscles bulged unnaturally beneath his armor now jagged with spikes and adorned with crude runes that glowed faintly crimson. His chainsword had grown to monstrous size, its teeth sharper, its edge humming with an almost predatory energy. Blood seemed drawn to him, clinging to his gauntlets and armor as if recognizing a kindred force. Every movement, every step, radiated power, rage, and divine purpose. Kaelus' army had also grown. Cultists, renegades, and warped survivors had rallied to his banner, drawn by the aura of divine fury that surrounded him. Entire regiments followed his path of destruction, their bloodlust magnified by the presence of their master. Each kill, each act of carnage, amplified the power of the blood champion, creating a feedback loop of slaughter that could not be stopped. The once disciplined Crimson Fangs who remained at his side were shadows of their former selves, awed and terrified, their loyalty strained against the ever-growing horror of their leader. The first strike of the apocalypse came in the form of the city of Karnath's Hold, a bastion of loyalist forces that had been untouched until now. Imperial Guard, mechanized units, and space marines of multiple chapters had gathered, preparing to halt the spread of Kaelus' reign of blood. They were confident in their strategy, believing numbers and technology could contain even the monstrous space marine. They were wrong. Kaelus led the assault with terrifying precision. He strode into the battlefield ahead of his forces, chainsword swinging, bolter spitting fire, and his aura of rage instilling panic in those who faced him. Tanks were ripped apart as if by a predator's claw, infantry were shredded before they could fire, even artillery emplacements were torn from their foundations, scattered like toys in the wake of his fury. The battlefield became a living altar of blood, each death a sacrament, each scream a hymn to the blood god. Amidst this chaos, Kaelus performed a ritual of ascension, a grotesque spectacle meant to cement his connection with Khorne. He drew symbols of power in blood across the battlefield, carving runes into the earth with the bodies of fallen enemies. He channeled the rage of his army, focusing their frenzy into a single point, a wave of energy that rippled across the city, causing walls to crumble, enemies to flee, and allies to fight with a supernatural fervor. Flames erupted spontaneously from the ground, turning streets into rivers of fire and blood. The air vibrated with the screams of the dying, each one feeding Kaelus' power further. The elite forces of the Imperium tried to regroup. Space Marine chapters, drawn from distant worlds, arrived to stem the tide. The Ultramarines, the Blood Angels, and even a detachment of Grey Knights. They brought strategies, psychic powers, and devastating weaponry, yet none could withstand Kaelus' wrath. His perception had evolved beyond human comprehension. He anticipated their every move, encountered their formations, and annihilated their best warriors before they could strike. Each battle became more than warfare, it became a ceremony of destruction, with Kaelus as its unholy priest. During one particular confrontation atop the cliffs of Malga's Spire, Kaelus faced a combined force of elite loyalist Marines and Imperial Knights. The sky thundered with plasma, missiles, and bolter fire. Yet Kaelus moved as if untouchable. His chainsword tore through the armor of knights like parchment, snapping limbs, cleaving torsos, and leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. Space Marines were thrown aside, their psychic powers ineffective against the hurricane of rage and divine favor that radiated from him. Kaelus laughed, a guttural, inhuman sound that resonated across the battlefield, every note a testament to his communion with Khorne. The planet itself seemed to respond to his presence. Mountains cracked, rivers boiled, and the ground beneath him trembled. The whispers of Khorne, once subtle and seductive, had become a maelstrom of divine command, guiding Kaelus with perfect clarity. He could feel the blood of every living creature on 40K, its potential for sacrifice, its ability to fuel his god's favor. The battlefield was no longer a place of tactics, it was a canvas, and Kaelus its painter, painting in the only medium that mattered: blood. Yet even in his exaltation, remnants of thought remained, faint echoes of the man he once was. He remembered faces, names, and a fleeting sense of loyalty. But these were immediately consumed by the ever-growing hunger of Khorne. Humanity was a weakness, a tether, and Kaelus severed it completely. His mind and body were now singular in purpose to serve the blood god through endless slaughter. Every kill, every ritual, every scream solidified his transformation. He was no longer Kaelus, no longer a soldier, no longer a man. He was Apocalypse incarnate, the living instrument of divine rage. In the final days of the campaign, Kaelus led a planet-wide massacre, moving from city to city, his army spreading devastation in waves. He performed grotesque rituals in each location, using the blood of thousands to inscribe runes, erect altars, and feed the dark energies coursing through him. Entire planetary sectors were reduced to ash and blood, populations decimated, and any resistance annihilated. The whispers of Khorne now guided not only his actions but the instincts of his followers, turning them into extensions of his will, mindless instruments of carnage. At the culmination of Chapter 4, Kaelus stood atop the ashes of the capital city, a mountain of corpses at his feet. Fires burned as the sky glowed crimson, reflecting the rage in his eyes. The whispers of Khorne surged into him like a tidal wave, filling every nerve, every thought, every heartbeat. He raised his chainsword high, the tip dripping with blood and ichor, and screamed a name that would echo across the galaxy for centuries. Khorne, all blood, all fury, I am yours. The galaxy would never forget the apocalypse of blood. 40K was now a monument to Kaelus' devotion, a testament to the cost of falling to Khorne's corruption. Entire armies had been shattered, cities obliterated, and the planet itself bled like an offering to the blood god. Kaelus had achieved a state beyond human comprehension. He was a living storm of rage, a harbinger of annihilation, and the universe trembled beneath the shadow of his ascension. Yet even as the fires raged and screams echoed, Kaelus' journey was far from complete. The whispers promised more worlds, more blood, more worship through devastation. He would not stop. He could not stop. Khorne's will was eternal, and Kaelus ablaze. Body and soul were now eternal vessels of divine wrath. The apocalypse had only just begun, and the stars themselves would bleed before Kaelus, the blood champion, was done. The stars themselves seemed to recoil before him. Kaelus moved across the galaxy not as a man, nor as a space marine, but as a living vessel of divine wrath, the chosen champion of Khorne. His armor had fused with his flesh, crimson spikes and jagged runes protruding in impossible angles, pulsing with the god's unholy energy. His chainsword had become a monster of metal and blood, practically sentient, whispering encouragements and commands from Khorne himself. Every swing tore through reality with raw, bloody force. Entire worlds fell under his shadow. The whispering winds carried the cries of the doomed. Oceans boiled with blood, and mountains split under the weight of war. Kaelus' forces were legion, drawn from corrupted cultists, renegade space marines, and every creature he had slaughtered and resurrected in the god's image. They moved as one, extensions of his will, striking with precision, fury, and devotion. Resistance was meaningless. Kaelus did not fight merely to kill, he fought to unleash Khorne's will upon the universe itself. The first of many planetary conquests was the industrial world of Sargoth Prime. Its cities had been fortified, its armies prepared, yet none could withstand him. Bolters and artillery fire tore through the skies, but Kaelus strode through them unscathed. Chainsword and power armor a storm of destruction. Entire battalions were obliterated before they even realized he had struck. His eyes glowed crimson beneath his helm, and every living being who saw him felt an instinctive, paralyzing terror. Upon entering the heart of Sargoth's capital, Kaelus performed a cataclysmic blood ritual. The city's rivers ran with ichor, the streets themselves carved with runes of massacre and devotion. He raised his chainsword to the sky, channeling the energy of thousands of deaths into a single, apocalyptic release. Fires erupted, structures crumbled, and the screams of the dying rose in a symphony of blood that Khorne himself acknowledged. This was no longer a battle, this was worship through annihilation. As the campaign continued, entire Imperial chapters attempted to intervene. Loyalist space marines, Deathwatch units, and even Grey Knights converged on Kaelus's path. They brought technology, strategy, and psychic might unmatched by any mortal foe. Yet Kaelus was no longer mortal. He moved with inhuman speed, strength, and foresight. Bolter fire tore through his foes, yet he shrugged off even the heaviest plasma blasts. His chainsword cut through armor like paper, splitting knights, marines, and tanks alike with godlike precision. Each strike was accompanied by a psychic echo of Khorne's approval, a rumble felt even in the souls of the survivors. In one battle, atop the shattered surface of a moon orbiting Sargoth Prime, Kaelus faced the combined forces of 3 Space Marine chapters, a contingent of Sisters of Battle, and Imperial Guard heavy armor. The clash tore the terrain apart, creating chasms and firestorms. Yet Kaelus moved like a hurricane. With each swing of his chainsword, reality itself seemed to tear, psychic waves shattered walls, and the cries of the dying fed him, strengthened him, transformed him further. His army followed in perfect synchrony, the chaos around him amplified by his rage, each step a calculated destruction. Khorne's influence reached its peak during a massive blood ritual on the moon's surface. Kaelus drew sigils in blood that glowed with unholy fire, erecting altars made of the bones of the fallen. His chainsword became a conduit for energy that tore the landscape, and he roared a name that echoed into the void. "Khorne, I am yours! Every death, every scream, every drop of blood belongs to you." The ritual marked the full transformation of Kaelus. Flesh, armor, and spirit had fused into a singular, unstoppable weapon of war. He could feel the life force of every being on the planet and its satellites. Every heartbeat, every pulse of fear or pain became part of him, fueling the endless cycle of slaughter. No one could resist him, no one could escape. The universe itself had become a battlefield, and Kaelus, the avatar of rage, was its inevitable victor. Across the galaxy, word spread of his unstoppable march. Imperial leaders, planetary governors, and even other chaos forces spoke his name in fear and reverence. To the enemies of Khorne, he was the embodiment of doom. To the followers, he was divine. Entire fleets were obliterated as he traversed the void in ships blessed, or perhaps corrupted, by the blood god himself. Worlds were sacrificed, populations extinguished, and armies annihilated. Everywhere he went, rivers of blood followed, staining planets, moons, and stars alike. Kaelus, a final confrontation came on the industrial hive world of Tarsis Magna. The planet had been prepared by loyalist forces as a bastion, a last hope to halt the Blood Champion. Yet Kaelus was beyond hope. He descended upon the surface like a falling god, chainsword swinging, bolter firing, his aura of divine rage radiating in waves that shattered morale and sanity alike. The Loyalists fought with desperate courage, but against Kaelus, courage was irrelevant. One by one, their defenses crumbled, their army shredded, their commanders slain. The planet was reduced to fire and blood in hours, an offering to Khorne, and Kaelus' presence imbued every death with sacred purpose. At the climax, Kaelus ascended atop the tallest tower of Tarsis Magna, the ruins of the city burning below. His chainsword pulsed with crimson light, the air thick with the scent of burning flesh and ozone. He roared, a sound that shook mountains, rattled ships in orbit, and echoed into space itself. The whispers of Khorne surged, now inseparable from his consciousness. Kaelus' body trembled with divine fury, his mind consumed entirely by the god's will. "I am Khorne's wrath incarnate! I am the avatar of rage!" Every soul, every world will know the glory of blood. The universe itself seemed to bend before him. Stars flickered, planets trembled, and life quivered in anticipation of the blood god's messenger. Kaelus was no longer a man, he was Apocalypse made flesh, the final instrument of divine slaughter, and nothing in the galaxy could withstand him. His corruption was total, his devotion absolute, his reign eternal. As Chapter 5 closes, Kaelus raises his chainsword to the heavens, and the galaxy knows only one truth: blood will flow endlessly, Khorne's servant will reign forever, and the avatar of rage will never be stopped. The universe itself is a battlefield, and Kaelus stands at its center, a god of slaughter, an immortal herald of divine fury, and the living embodiment of Khorne's eternal wrath.